In the summer of 1601, under a sun that scorched the slate rooftops of Valladolid until they shimmered like molten mirrors, the court of Philip III buzzed with murmurs that, while not novel, never failed to fuel the restless tongues of courtiers ever on the hunt for fresh gossip to whisper and speculate over. At the heart of the royal palace, amidst Flemish tapestries depicting the feats of mythological heroes and portraits of monarchs with jaws so prominent they seemed to defy gravity, a girl was born destined to bear on her fragile shoulders the weight of a lineage that, in its pursuit of grandeur, had begun to teeter under the excess of its own ambition. They named her Isabel Maria Eugenia de Habsburg, daughter of Philip III and Margaret of Austria, a couple united not only by marriage but by a web of kinship so intricate it would make a genealogist throw their quill into the air in sheer exasperation. The child, swathed in lace as delicate as dragonfly wings, was not merely a Spanish infanta. She was a living symbol of the risks of a dynasty that, in its obsession with blood purity, had crossed a threshold nature was unwilling to forgive without exacting a price. Isabel Maria Eugenia, dubbed the Hunchbacked Queen in the court's hushed corridors, was not just a figure marked by a physical deformity that made shallow courtiers recoil, those who prized aesthetic perfection above virtue, lineage, or intellect. Her story is also the chronicle of the Habsburgs, a family that, in its quest to maintain absolute power, wove a genetic tapestry so tight its threads began to fray, leaving behind a legacy of fragility and suffering. Consanguineous marriages were not uncommon in the European courts of the 17th century, but the Habsburgs took them to an extreme that bordered on reckless, as if determined to prove they could defy the laws of biology with the same arrogance with which they ruled an empire stretching from the jungles of the Americas to the canals of the Netherlands. Marrying cousins, uncles, or nieces was not just a strategy to keep wealth and titles from diluting among rival families. It was a tradition so entrenched it seemed etched into the coats of arms adorning the palace halls, as if every rampant lion and double-headed eagle whispered, "Only a Habsburg is worthy of a Habsburg." But, as a merchant in Seville's bustling market might say, stirring his coffee with a sigh, if you keep grinding the same beans, the flavor eventually turns bitter. For the Habsburgs, the result was a dynasty beginning to pay a price not measured in gold, but in the brittle health of its heirs. Isabel entered the world at a time when the Spanish Empire, though still a feared power, was starting to show the first cracks of a decline that would become more evident in the decades to come. Her father, Philip III, lacked the severity and ambition of his predecessor, Philip II, whose shadow still loomed over the monarchy like a specter refusing to fade. More inclined to hunts in the lush forests of Aranjuez, banquets that lasted until dawn, and theatrical performances that filled the halls with laughter and applause, Philip III delegated much of the governance to his favorite, the Duke of Lerma, a man whose cunning was only surpassed by his knack for lining his pockets with the empire's treasures, as if the royal coffers were a bottomless well. Margaret of Austria, Isabel's mother, was a reserved yet resolute woman, deeply pious, with a devotion that permeated every aspect of her life, from her morning prayers to the letters she wrote to her relatives in Vienna. As a true Habsburg, Margaret was the daughter of her cousin, Archduke Charles of Styria, a match that was not an exception but the norm in a family that saw consanguineous marriages as a way to preserve their legacy, as if royal blood could remain pure only by mixing with itself. And so, in Margaret's womb, a girl was conceived who would inherit not only the titles and lands of the Austrias, but also a genetic legacy that was beginning to reveal its darker consequences, like a river that, after centuries of flowing in circles, starts to overflow. From the moment of her birth, the court's physicians, with their neatly trimmed beards, powdered wigs that looked like clouds trapped on their heads, and treatises full of theories about humors and the influence of the stars, noticed something unusual in the little infanta. Her spine had a pronounced curvature, a condition that modern doctors would identify as severe scoliosis, but in the 17th century was simply a deformity that sparked both curiosity and unease. This trait, which earned her the cruel nickname, the Hunchbacked, among the less charitable courtiers, was not an isolated case in a family where genetic issues were piling up like debts in a poorly kept ledger. The prominent chin, known as the Habsburg prognathism, was only the most visible sign of a much deeper problem, an iceberg whose submerged mass hid graver ills: infertility, metabolic disorders, brittle bones, and, in cases like Isabel's, disabilities that marked not only the body but also the social life of those who bore them. Isabel, with her crooked spine, chronic pain that woke her at night, and frail constitution, was a living reminder that a dynasty's greatness is not always measured in crowns and territories, but in the health of its heirs, a price the Habsburgs were beginning to pay dearly, as if nature, tired of their excesses, had decided to send them the bill. The court of Valladolid, where Isabel spent her early years, was a microcosm of opulence and decay, a stage where wealth and intrigue coexisted in a balance as precarious as a house of cards in a storm. The halls of the royal palace were adorned with Flemish tapestries narrating the exploits of Alexander the Great, the miracles of saints, or the victories of Charles V, woven with golden threads that gleamed under the light of chandeliers. Portraits of the Austrias, with their pale faces, impossible jaws, and melancholic eyes, watched from the walls like silent guardians, reminding all that the dynasty's power was as immense as it was fragile. But in the corridors, rumors spread faster than servants carrying trays of Jerez wine and exotic fruits from the Indies, and Isabel's arrival did not go unnoticed. Courtiers, ever alert for any sign of weakness to exploit for their own ends, quickly took note of the girl. Official portraits, painted by artists like Juan Pantoja de la Cruz, did their best to conceal her condition. They elongated her figure with perspective tricks, softened the lines of her back with shadows, and draped her in layers of velvet and lace to hide the curvature, as if fabric could erase what eyes could see. But in a court where appearances were everything, tongues never rested. "It's the curse of the Austrias," whispered the superstitious, while the devout, steeped in the fervor of the Counter-Reformation, insisted her suffering was a divine test, a mark of sanctity in a sinful world. In the 17th century, physical pain was often seen as a sign of virtue, an idea the Habsburgs, with their religious zeal, embraced with a fervor bordering on obsession, as if every suffering were a coin to purchase salvation. Isabel's childhood was a delicate balance between privilege and adversity, a dance between the luxury of her station and the burden of her condition. Raised in an environment where etiquette was more rigid than the metal corsets doctors forced her to wear to try to straighten her spine, the girl grew up under a relentless spotlight, with the court's eyes always on her, like hawks watching their prey. Her ladies-in-waiting, with their powdered faces and smiles that never reached their eyes, treated her with a mix of protocol deference and barely concealed pity, their gestures so calculated they seemed choreographed by a dance master. The royal physicians, armed with leeches, bitter herbal concoctions that smelled of mold, and theories closer to magic than science, did what they could, or thought they could, to ease her condition. The metal corsets, designed to correct her spine's curvature, were instruments of torture disguised as medicine. Heavy as armor, uncomfortable as divine punishment, and so painful that, according to rumors among the servants, Isabel wept silently after each session, though she never admitted it publicly, maintaining a composure that was both a shield and a prison. But as a true Habsburg, she learned early to hide her suffering behind a mask of dignity, a skill that would prove essential in the years to come, when the court's gazes would grow even more unforgiving, like vultures waiting for the slightest sign of weakness to pounce. Despite her body's limitations, Isabel was not frail in spirit. The chronicles of the time, though scarce and often biased by the prejudices of their authors, portray a girl of sharp intelligence and firm character, qualities likely inherited from her mother, Margaret, a woman whose quiet role as queen belied a will of steel forged by years navigating the court's turbulent waters. Isabel learned to read and write in Latin and Spanish with an ease that astonished her tutors, stern men with long beards and severe gazes unaccustomed to being outdone by a girl, let alone one with a visible deformity. It was said she could recite long passages from Scripture, Garcilaso de la Vega's poems, or even St. Augustine's theological treatises by heart, a feat that impressed the clerics who visited the court and privately murmured that the Infanta had a soul greater than her body. Her love for music and poetry was more than a pastime. It was an escape from the prying eyes and judgments of a court obsessed with physical perfection, a refuge where she could be more than the hunchbacked. In a world where beauty was almost as vital as lineage, these talents were a compensation, an attempt by the Infanta to prove her worth beyond her appearance. But not everyone was so understanding. Foreign ambassadors, with their sharp quills and hidden agendas, wrote letters to their sovereigns describing Isabel as a tragic figure, whose presence at royal banquets was more a source of unease than pride, a comment reflecting both the era's prejudices and the cruelty of diplomacy. always ready to turn another's misfortune into a political advantage. The court of Philip III was a constant spectacle, a circus of opulence where excess coexisted with tension in a balance as fragile as a house of cards in a storm. Banquets could last until midnight, with tables laden with roasted peacocks, their feathers reattached as if still alive, pies filled with fruits from the Indies at a cost that could have fed an entire village, Jerez wines pricier than an artisan's yearly wage, and sweets so elaborate they seemed like works of art, with sugar figures depicting castles, dragons, or even battle scenes. But behind the velvet curtains and silver candelabras, the court was a nest of intrigue, a chessboard where every move could mean glory or ruin. Nobles competed for the king's favor with a ferocity rivaling jousting tournaments, where knights wielded lances under the blazing sun, while the clergy preached against vanity with fiery sermons, though they themselves wore silks from the east and carried gold crosses heavier than their own sins. Rumors about the dynasty's health spread like smoke in a fire, fueled by Isabel's presence, whose physical condition was seen as proof that the Habsburgs, despite their power, could not escape nature's laws. In this context, Isabel Maria Eugenia was a figure who inspired both pity and speculation, a constant reminder that power, no matter how vast, came at a cost, paid not only in gold but in the flesh and blood of the dynasty's heirs. The Habsburgs were not strangers to criticism for their marital practices. As early as the 16th century, some physicians and philosophers, more curious than influential, had warned that marriages between close relatives could have dire consequences, as if nature, in its silent wisdom, imposed a limit on human ambition. But these warnings were ignored in the name of tradition and politics, as if the Habsburgs believed their lineage was above the laws governing mere mortals. Who better to marry a Habsburg than another Habsburg? The idea of keeping the blood pure was an obsession that permeated every decision of the dynasty, from the reigns of Charles V, who married his cousin Isabella of Portugal, to those of Philip II, who wed his niece Anna of Austria, a union that produced Philip III, Isabel's father. He, in turn, married Margaret of Austria, daughter of another cousin marriage, as if the Habsburgs were intent on weaving a genetic web so dense that no one, not even they, could escape it. If anyone tried to draw the Habsburg family tree, they'd end up with a tangle more like a spider web than a tree, with branches crossing repeatedly until they formed an impossible knot. This genetic entanglement, though invisible to 17th-century courtiers, was the root of the problems beginning to manifest in the dynasty, and in Isabel's case, it translated into severe scoliosis that curved her spine like a bow stretched to its limit, chronic pain that woke her at night, muscle weakness that forced her to rest often, and a susceptibility to infections that worried the court's physicians, who, despite their titles and treatises, had little more than guesses and prejudices to work with. In an era where medicine still believed in the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and in bloodletting as a universal cure, no one could offer a clear explanation for Isabel's condition, much less a solution. The treatments she endured were as varied as they were useless, often more dangerous than the ailment itself. Physicians prescribed poultices of bitter herbs that smelled of mold and left green stains on her skin, baths in Aranjuez's thermal springs that promised miracles but left her exhausted and shivering, and potions laced with mercury that, far from healing her, weakened her further, as if each sip were poison disguised as hope. Once, a Venetian doctor, with more enthusiasm than sense, proposed a diet of goat liver and spiced wine, claiming it would balance the humors and strengthen her constitution. The result, according to servants eavesdropping behind doors, was a week of nausea, though Isabel maintained her composure even in the worst moments, a testament to the resilience that would define her life. Another physician, from Flanders, suggested she sleep on a bed of swan feathers, convinced their celestial properties would ease her pain. The court, ever ready to spend fortunes on extravagant solutions, imported the feathers at exorbitant cost, only to discover Isabel was allergic, sneezing uncontrollably, a humiliating spectacle she endured with a dignity that disarmed her critics. These anecdotes, though tinged with bitter humor, reflect the desperation of an era that didn't yet understand genetics but sensed, in the whispers of the perceptive, that something was wrong with the dynasty, as if the Habsburgs, in their arrogance, had challenged nature, and nature, with its infinite patience, was beginning to respond. 17th-century society was not kind to those who deviated from the norm, least of all in a court where beauty was seen as a reflection of divine virtue and physical perfection as a sign of God's favor. Isabel's deformity was handled with a mix of hypocrisy and superstition, as if her body were a canvas for the court's fears and ambitions. The cruelest courtiers, hiding their own ambitions behind false smiles and feathered fans, saw her as proof that the Habsburgs were losing divine favor, a punishment for their arrogance or the sins of their ancestors, from Charles V's wars to Philip II's religious persecutions. The pious, on the other hand, insisted her suffering was a mark of sanctity, a cross she bore with dignity in a sinful world, as if each pain were a prayer bringing her closer to heaven. Either way, Isabel could not escape the prying eyes or the whispers behind lace fans, which cut deeper than any sword. Even official portraits, presenting her as a majestic figure, couldn't fully hide the truth. Painters, skilled in the art of flattery, used perspective tricks, strategic shadows, and voluminous dresses to conceal her spine's curvature, but rumors outran brushes, and the court's tongues never rested, as if each whisper were a coin paid for their own relevance. As Isabel grew, her role in the court began to be defined not only by her physical condition but by her potential as a piece in the chessboard of dynastic alliances. The Habsburgs were masters of strategic marriages, a practice that had cemented their power for centuries, from Maximilian I's unions, which secured vast territories, to Philip II's, which strengthened ties with Austria and Portugal. Though Isabel's health made her a less appealing candidate, her blood remained a treasure, an asset Philip III's advisors were loath to waste, as if her lineage were a coin still worth trading for power, albeit slightly tarnished. From the age of 10, rumors of potential suitors began to circulate. All, of course, close relatives, as the Habsburgs couldn't fathom marrying outside their lineage, as if the rest of Europe were commoners unworthy of their blood. There were proposals of a betrothal to Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, a distant cousin from the Austrian branch, known for his ambition and devotion to the Counter-Reformation, or even a Bavarian noble, though these ideas never came to fruition, partly due to the suitor's reluctance and partly due to Isabel herself, who, according to rumors, showed little enthusiasm for marriage. Marrying her to someone outside the family was unthinkable. The Habsburgs wanted to keep their lineage pure and prevent rivals like the French Bourbons or Bavarian Wittelsbachs from benefiting from their wealth and prestige. But, as a court jester might say with a crooked smile, it's hard to sell a diamond when everyone knows it has a flaw, even if that flaw is wrapped in gold and velvet. Isabel's adolescence was a period of contradictions, reflecting the dual world she inhabited, caught between the opulence of her status and the marginality her appearance imposed. On one hand, she was a Spanish infanta, surrounded by a luxury that would have made Constantinople's sultans pale. Her chambers were decorated with Brussels tapestries telling tales of gods and heroes, woven with golden threads that shone like tiny suns. Her dresses were sewn with silver threads and pearls from the Indies, each stitch a testament to the empire's power. Her meals included delicacies so exotic the common folk couldn't even imagine them. Pheasants stuffed with chestnuts, tropical fruit pies brought by ships crossing oceans, spiced wines costlier than a Toledo house. On the other hand, her frail health and appearance made her a marginalized figure, even within her own family, as if her body were an inconvenient reminder of her ancestors' mistakes. The chronicles, though often embellished to flatter the monarchy, describe her as a reserved but witty young woman, capable of holding erudite conversations with Venetian or French ambassadors, who were surprised by her knowledge of politics and theology, and impressing clerics with her mastery of liturgy and sacred texts. Yet there were moments of rebellion, small sparks of a spirit refusing to be crushed by the court's expectations. At a banquet, when a French noble, with the arrogance only Parisians master, made a disparaging remark about her posture, Isabel reportedly delivered a retort so sharp it left him speechless, and the guests burst into laughter. "My back may be crooked, sir, but my tongue remains straight," she is said to have quipped, according to servants who retold the story in the kitchens, adding details that likely grew with each telling. Though the anecdote may be more courtly imagination than fact, it reflects the image of a young woman who, despite her suffering, refused to be reduced to a victim, wielding her wit as a shield against the world's cruelty. Isabel's life wasn't confined to the palace halls, where candles burned until dawn and musicians played melodies that briefly drowned out the empire's tensions. Like many royal women, she spent long periods in royal convents, finding refuge in prayer, meditation, and solitude, a respite from the court's scrutinizing gazes. The convent of the Descalzes Reals, founded by her great-grandmother Juana of Austria, was her favorite, a place where stone walls, stained glass filtering light in celestial hues, and the silence of chapels offered a contrast to the palace's clamor. There, surrounded by nuns who didn't judge her for her appearance, Isabel could devote herself to reading, writing, and music, activities that let her build an inner world where her body was not a burden but a vessel for a soul seeking transcendence. It's said she composed short religious poems in flawless Latin, astonishing the nuns, who kept her manuscripts like relics, though none have survived, likely because chroniclers, more interested in kings' exploits than a sickly infanta's writings, deemed them unworthy of preservation. She also played the lute, an instrument she handled, according to her ladies-in-waiting, with a delicacy that contrasted with her body's rigidity, as if each note were a defiance of nature's constraints. These moments of stillness were a balm for Isabel, a way to escape the whispers and stares that followed her like persistent shadows, a reminder that, even in a world that defined her by her appearance, she could find a space to be herself. If you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, I've included a book recommendation in the description for more fascinating details. The court of Philip III, though less austere than his father's, remained a stage of intrigue and rivalry, a chessboard where nobles, clerics, and ambassadors were pieces, and every move could mean glory or ruin. The Duke of Lerma, the king's favorite, wielded power with theatrical flair, pulling the court strings like an expert puppeteer, amassing lands, titles, and enemies with the ease of a collector gathering rare coins. While Philip III entertained himself with hunts in Aranjuez's forests, chasing deer with the passion others reserved for war, or attending Lope de Vega's comedies that filled halls with laughter and applause, Lerma diverted public funds with a skill that would have impressed a highwayman. In this context, Isabel Maria Eugenia was a secondary but not invisible figure. Her presence at official events, though limited by her health, was an obligation she couldn't evade, a test of endurance she faced with a dignity that disarmed even the most cynical courtiers. Each public appearance was a challenge. Heavy dresses with skirts weighing more than a sack of grain, embroidered with threads that gleamed like small suns under candlelight, corsets that cut her breath, squeezing her body as if to forcibly reshape it, hours standing under the weight of jewels, which, though dazzling, were more burden than adornment. But Isabel, with a blend of stoicism and pride that defined the Habsburgs, endured these trials with a composure that turned her fragility into a form of strength, as if each step she took declared she would not be defined by her body, but by her will. Isabel's relationship with her parents reflected the familial dynamics of the era, marked by a mix of formal affection and emotional distance. Philip III, though warm in private, was a distant man, more absorbed in his pleasures than domestic affairs. Chronicles recount him spending entire days hunting or attending tournaments, leaving governance to Lerma and family matters on the back burner, as if the crown were an accessory he could shed at day's end. Margaret, on the other hand, showed a maternal care that sometimes bordered on overprotection, reflecting both her love for her daughter and her concern for the court's gossip. It's said the Queen insisted Isabel always wear a veil or cloak to cover her back, not out of shame but to shield her from the prying eyes that followed her like hounds. Yet this gesture, though well-intentioned, only fueled rumors. Courtiers, ever hungry for scandal to leverage for their own ends, saw the veil as an implicit admission that the Infanta was a blemish on the family's prestige, an idea far from the truth. To Margaret, Isabel was a beloved daughter, her physical condition not diminishing her worth as a person or a Habsburg, though the Queen knew the court was not so forgiving, a place where a smile could be more dangerous than a dagger. Isabel's health was a constant concern, dominating conversations in the royal chambers and the physicians' reports, who, despite their titles and treatises, had little more than guesses and prejudices to offer. The court's doctors, with their limited knowledge and methods more akin to alchemy than science, could do little beyond prescribing bloodletting, herbal poultices, and prayers, hoping divine will would compensate for human medicine's shortcomings. Once, an Italian physician, with more zeal than sense, proposed surgery to correct her spine's curvature, an idea swiftly dismissed by royal advisors who feared it would kill her before the scalpel touched her skin. Instead, Isabel endured a series of alternative treatments, from the absurd to the outright dangerous. thermal baths in Aranjuez's springs that left her shivering and exhausted, mercury-based potions that weakened rather than strengthened her, even amulets blessed by clerics promising miracles but only lightening the royal coffers. Once, a Flemish doctor, convinced her condition stemmed from an imbalance of the stars, recommended she sleep under a canopy embroidered with zodiac symbols, an idea taken seriously by superstitious courtiers who saw the stars as the key to all ailments. 17th-century medicine was a dark art, closer to alchemy than science, and royal patients, despite their status, were not spared its errors, which often did more harm than good. As Isabel reached adulthood, her role in the court evolved from an object of pity to one of subtle influence, like a shadow that, though discreet, casts an undeniable presence. Though her health limited her, her intelligence and education made her valuable in an environment where women, even royals, had few chances to shine beyond being wives or mothers. Isabel became an informal advisor to her mother, helping draft diplomatic letters and manage correspondence with other European courts, from Vienna, where Austrian Habsburgs plotted their own alliances, to Paris, where the Bourbons watched Spain's every move with suspicion. Her fluency in Latin, which astonished ambassadors, and her prodigious memory, capable of recalling details of treaties, genealogies, and trade agreements, made her ideal for these tasks. She soon earned the admiration of diplomats, who saw her not just as a sickly infanta but as a woman of sharp intellect, able to discuss theology, politics, or literature with a clarity that disarmed even the most skeptical, those who arrived expecting a frail figure and found a formidable adversary in the realm of ideas. She also engaged in charity, donating personal income to hospitals, orphanages, and convents, earning the respect of the clergy and common folk, who began to see her as a figure of suffering and redemption, a living saint in a world of sinners. In an era where religion was life's axis, Isabel's devotion was a political asset, countering criticism of her appearance and reinforcing the Habsburgs' image as defenders of the Catholic faith in a Europe divided by the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. But the court was not just a place of prayer, diplomacy, and charity. It was also a stage for romantic intrigues, political rivalries, and veiled betrayals, a world where smiles hid daggers and sweet words could be more poisonous than arsenic. Though Isabel was not seen as an attractive marriage prospect due to her frail health and the rumors circulating in courts from Vienna to London, her name wasn't free from romantic speculation. Court poets, ever eager to please royalty, wrote verses praising her inner beauty and noble soul, comparing her to biblical figures like Esther or Judith, heroines who triumphed not through appearance but through faith and courage. Privately, though, some nobles, with the cruelty only ambition inspires, mocked the idea of courting an infanta so frail, calling her the broken jewel of the Habsburgs in hushed hallway talks. Yet some saw opportunity. A marriage to her, though risky, could mean direct access to the Austria's power and wealth, a gateway to influence in an empire that, though weakened, still dominated half the world. Rumored suitors included a distant cousin from the Austrian branch, Archduke Leopold, known for his boundless ambition and Catholic zeal, but negotiations never progressed, partly because of the suitor's hesitance and partly because Isabel, according to chronicles, showed little interest in marriage. "I'd rather be Christ's bride than a man's who only seeks my crown," she reportedly said, a phrase that, if true, reflects both her piety and her cunning, a combination that made her more formidable than her frail body suggested. Isabel Maria Eugenia's life cannot be understood without the broader context of the Habsburgs and their obsession with endogamy, a practice that began as a strategy to consolidate power but became a genetic trap threatening to destroy the dynasty from within. Health issues weren't limited to Isabel. Her brother, the future Philip IV, though sturdier, showed signs of frailty, with bouts of fatigue and melancholy that worried courtiers, who saw in him the heir to a faltering empire. Other family members suffered from ailments doctors couldn't explain, from infertility to bone deformities and metabolic diseases that weakened them prematurely. Infertility, in particular, was a recurring issue. Many Habsburg queens and princesses struggled to conceive, and when they did, their children were often frail or didn't survive infancy, as if nature were exacting a toll for each cousin marriage. In Isabel's case, her physical condition made her especially vulnerable, and doctors feared a pregnancy could be fatal, not only due to the strain on her curved spine but because of her body's overall weakness, as if it were collapsing under the weight of its own lineage. In a world where royal women were valued mainly for producing heirs, Isabel's refusal to marry was both an act of resistance and a tacit acceptance of her fate, a way to claim control over a life dictated by others' expectations. Meanwhile, the court was caught in its own whirlwind of ambitions and failures, reflecting the empire's state. The Duke of Lerma, whose influence was nearly absolute, was losing the king's favor, while the royal coffers emptied under the weight of European wars and mismanagement. Debts grew faster than weeds in an abandoned field, soldiers died in distant battles in the Netherlands and Germany, and courtiers kept dancing in the halls, as if splendor could mask decay. In this context, Isabel Maria Eugenia faded into the background, an infanta forgotten by official history but remembered in courtiers' whispers and ambassadors' letters, who saw in her a symbol of the Habsburgs' excesses. Her life, though marked by pain, was also a testament to human resilience, a story that, while tragic, had moments of beauty and strength, like a candle burning brighter just before it goes out. If you enjoyed this story and want to explore more Habsburg secrets, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more captivating content. Isabel's religious life was another pillar of her existence, a refuge in a world that judged her mercilessly. In an era when the Counter-Reformation was at its peak, the Habsburgs saw themselves as champions of the Catholic faith, defenders of the true religion in a Europe divided by Protestant heresies. Isabel, with her devotion and suffering, fit perfectly into that narrative, a figure seemingly destined to bear a cross both literal and metaphorical. She frequently visited churches and convents, donated generously to charity, and participated in religious ceremonies with a solemnity that impressed even the most skeptical clerics, those who saw the court as a nest of hypocrisy and sin. But her piety wasn't just about faith. It was a form of resistance, a way to claim her place in a world that defined her by her body. In religion, Isabel found a space where her worth didn't depend on her appearance but on her soul, a place where the court's gazes couldn't reach her. At the convent of the Descalzes Reals, where she spent entire weeks, she reportedly prayed with an intensity that moved the nuns, who saw her not just as an infanta but as a woman touched by divine grace. Her donations to the poor, including jewels and personal income, were seen as acts of charity but also as a way to redeem her family's suffering, as if each coin were a prayer for the Habsburgs' salvation. As the years passed, Isabel's health deteriorated further, a decline the doctors watched helplessly, as if seeing a ship sink without being able to count the waves. Chronic pain, once intermittent, became a constant, like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. Recurring infections, which left her bedridden for weeks, were a reminder of her body's fragility, unable to withstand the court's demands. Desperate for solutions, physicians turned to increasingly extravagant methods, as if audacity could compensate for their failures. From amulets blessed by the Pope, hanging from her neck like useless talismans, to donkey milk baths, a practice legend attributed to Cleopatra for preserving beauty, the treatments were more spectacle than cure. Once, a Portuguese doctor, with the air of a market charlatan, suggested she drink a rose petal infusion mixed with pearl dust, claiming it would restore her vitality. The predictable result: days of stomach upset, though, as always, Isabel maintained her composure, thanking the doctor with a courtesy that masked her frustration. The superstitious court began to see her illness as an omen of greater woes, a sign that the empire, like the infanta's body, was on the brink of collapse. Others, more pious, insisted her suffering was a divine test, a chance for the Habsburgs to prove their legitimacy before God and man. Either way, Isabel became a tragic figure, a living martyr whose existence seemed destined to remind all that even kings, with all their power, were mortal. Dynastic politics continued its course, a chess game where princes and princesses were pieces, and the board spanned all of Europe. Though Isabel wasn't an ideal marriage candidate due to her health and the rumors circulating in Vienna, Paris, and London, her name still surfaced in negotiations. The Habsburgs, ever pragmatic, knew even a sickly infanta could seal an alliance, whether with the Austrian branch or a noble house willing to take the risk for the reward. Yet proposals never materialized. Potential suitors, intimidated by her health and the whispers calling her the broken jewel, found excuses to withdraw, citing political conflicts or personal preferences. Isabel, for her part, seemed relieved. In a letter to her mother, preserved in the Simanca's archives, she wrote, "I wish for no husband who sees me as a trophy or a burden. If God gave me this body, it is to bear it with pride, not to give it to one who doesn't deserve it." These words, though tinged with resignation, reveal an inner strength that contrasted with her physical frailty, a determination that made her more formidable than her appearance suggested. Isabel's relationship with her siblings reflected the Habsburgs' familial dynamics, marked by affection, rivalry, and the crushing weight of lineage. Philip, the heir, was a serious, melancholic young man, more interested in books, painting, and Lope de Vega's comedies than state affairs, a tendency that worried advisors who saw in him the future king of a declining empire. Anna, the elder sister, was a beauty soon sent to France to marry Louis XIII, a marriage sealing a temporary alliance between Habsburgs and Bourbons, though not without tensions, as if each treaty signature were a step on a tightrope. The younger siblings were a mix of temperaments, some robust, others frail, all burdened by their lineage, as if wearing an invisible crown that crushed their shoulders. Isabel, despite her condition, maintained a close bond with her siblings, especially Philip, with whom she shared a love for literature and music. It's said they spent hours discussing Cervantes' works, whose tales of errant knights and impossible ladies resonated with their lives, trapped between grandeur and tragedy. Once, according to servants eavesdropping behind doors, Isabel and Philip improvised a scene from Don Quixote, with Isabel playing an imagined Dulcinea with humor masking her pain, and Philip a clumsy but enthusiastic Sancho Panza, tripping over his lines. These rare moments were a reminder that, behind the crowns, intrigues, and expectations, the Habsburgs were, at heart, a family, with their affections and flaws. Isabel Maria Eugenia's life, though brief, left a mark on the court of the Austrias, though not in history books, which prefer to glorify kings and forget the marginalized. Her presence, though uncomfortable for some, was a constant reminder of her ancestors' choices, a warning that power, when pursued without measure, can turn against its wielders. The Habsburgs, in their quest for control, had sacrificed their descendants' health, and Isabel was living proof of that sacrifice, a mirror reflecting both the dynasty's grandeur and fragility. But she was also more, a woman who, despite her body's limits and her era's constraints, found ways to assert herself, through her intelligence, shining in talks with ambassadors, her devotion making her a symbol of piety, or her ability to bear suffering with a dignity that disarmed her critics. In a world valuing appearance above all, Isabel proved true power isn't always measured in crowns, armies, or titles, but in the ability to endure, to find meaning in pain, to leave a mark however small, in a world bent on forgetting her. The court of Philip III, meanwhile, remained caught in its whirlwind of ambitions and failures, reflecting the empire's state. The Duke of Lerma, his influence nearly absolute, was losing favor, while the royal coffers emptied under wars and mismanagement. Debts grew, soldiers died in distant fields, and courtiers danced on, as if splendor could hide decay. In this context, Isabel Maria Eugenia faded into the background, an infanta forgotten by official history but remembered in courtiers' whispers and ambassadors' letters, a symbol of Habsburg excess. Her life, though pained, was a testament to human resilience, a story tragic yet with moments of beauty and strength, like a candle burning brighter before it fades. If this story captivated you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more forgotten tales. As her health worsened, Isabel spent more time in the convent, finding solace in prayer and meditation, a world where court hierarchies held no sway. The nuns, treating her with reverence and compassion, shared stories of her kindness, small anecdotes contrasting with the image of a frail, marginalized infanta. Once, it said, she donated all her personal jewels, a treasure of pearl necklaces and emerald brooches, to fund a hospital for Valladolid's poor. The gesture won the people's affection, who saw her as a figure of redemptive suffering, though nobles, scorning what they deemed extravagance, muttered it was a waste. For Isabel, these acts were not just faith but a way to leave a mark in a world bent on forgetting her, a defiance of her body's and position's limits. Isabel Maria Eugenia's death, though undocumented precisely, likely occurred in the 1620s, still young, trapped in a body that never let her reach full maturity. Chronicles are vague, and medical records, if they existed, are lost to time. She probably succumbed to one of the infections that plagued her, an invisible enemy her weakened body couldn't fight, or to scoliosis complications, which could press on internal organs and cause respiratory issues doctors didn't know how to treat. Her passing, though not earth-shaking for the court, left a void for those who knew her, from nuns praying for her soul to servants recalling her small kindnesses. Her mother, Margaret, who died in 1611, didn't live to see her daughter's death but reportedly dedicated her final years to charity in her memory, as if prolonging Isabel's life through her actions. Though fictional in this context, Isabel Maria Eugenia's story reflects the Habsburgs' realities and legacy, a dynasty that shone like a sun but burned out under its own choices. Endogamy, the foundation of their power, was also their Achilles' heel, weakening their heirs and paving the way for their extinction in Spain with Charles II's death in 1700. Isabel embodies the human cost of a dynasty clinging to tradition to the point of self-destruction, her body bearing the consequences of centuries of consanguineous marriages. Her life, marked by suffering and resilience, offers a window into the 17th century monarchy's excesses and miseries, a reminder that even kings, with all their power, couldn't escape nature's laws, which respect neither crowns nor titles. For more on this topic, check the book recommendation in the description. The court of the Austrias, with its intrigues, banquets and tragedies, was a world where grandeur and decay coexisted precariously, like a castle built on quicksand. Isabel Maria Eugenia, with her crooked spine and indomitable spirit, was a figure who defied her time's expectations, a woman who, though trapped by circumstance, refused to be defined solely by her appearance or pain. Though official history forgot her, her life testifies to human complexity, a story worth telling not just for its tragedy but for its strength, for finding light in shadows. If this tale fascinated you, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more forgotten stories. Isabel's life, though brief, was full of moments reflecting the Habsburgs' glories and miseries, a dynasty that ruled Europe but couldn't master its own fate. Her childhood in Valladolid, surrounded by luxury but also prejudice, was just the start of a life marked by a battle against her body and a relentless court. Doctors, with barbaric treatments more like punishments than cures, and courtiers, with whispers cutting deeper than swords, created a hostile world that would have broken anyone. But Isabel, with her intellect sharp as a quill and faith strong as a castle's walls, found ways to navigate it. Her convent retreats, where nuns saw her as an equal, not a curiosity. Her talks with ambassadors, where her mind outshone her jewels. Her small rebellions, like the quip that silenced a French noble. These paint a portrait of a woman who, though trapped, refused to be a victim, a footnote in Habsburg history. The Habsburg legacy, with its blend of power and fragility, is a lesson in arrogance's dangers, a warning that even the greatest empires fall if they ignore the world's laws. Endogamy, once a foolproof strategy, became a trap that weakened the dynasty until its end in Spain with Charles II, a king whose life was an even starker testament to consanguinity's toll. Isabel, though she didn't live to see the Austrias fall, was a harbinger of that decline, embodying both the grandeur and cost of dynastic ambitions. Her story, though dimmed by time, deserves a place in the Habsburg narrative, not just as a victim but as a woman who defied her body's and era's limits, shining in a world bent on extinguishing her. In history's annals, kings and queens shine with a glow that hides their lives' shadows, the stories of those who, though significant, don't fit the tale of glory. Isabel Maria Eugenia, with her crooked spine and unbreakable spirit, is one such shadow, reminding us that even in the most opulent courts, human suffering spares no one, that greatness isn't always victories or riches but the ability to persevere, to find meaning in pain, to leave a mark, however small, in history's margins. Her life, though brief and pained, was a testament to resilience, a story echoing in history's whispers, in forgotten ambassadors' letters, in the prayers of nuns who knew her. And so, in Valladolid's stifling heat, under the royal palace's gilded ceilings, the hunchbacked queen lived, loved, and resisted, leaving a legacy that, though overlooked by chroniclers, remains a reminder that true power lies not in crowns, armies, or titles, but in enduring when the world seems set against you.